He's an associate professor and swine extension specialist in the Department of Animal Science at Texas A&M. His responsibilities include teaching and undergrad swine production and management courses and leading statewide extension efforts to improve pig production efficiency and pork producer profitability. His applied research interests are in better understanding sow and litter interactions and identifying cost-effective methods to improve early in life piglet health, welfare, and growth through maternal and neonatal intervention. And he's going to be presenting some Swine Reproduction 101, and it'll cover the core principles of successful swine reproduction, including heat detection, breeding time, and basic management practices. And you should gain some practical insight into improve consistency and outcomes in the breeding herd that you guys have. So you can take it away, Dr. Wiegert.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that, Marissa. Really appreciate the opportunity to meet with y'all and be a part of this. The folks at Ohio State, I think, have done a really nice job putting together a good agenda. I've had a chance to kind of sit in and listen to some of the earlier presentations, Dr. Niblets, a lot of the really good health information that's being presented. And so I think, first and foremost, I want to kind of acknowledge Ohio State and all the awesome stuff that they've done. And then also just the organizers of the conference. Running these kinds of virtual things is extraordinarily difficult to make sure all the people are in the right places and the technology is working. And from my perspective so far, it's worked really well. Always you'll have the minor glitches, but man, it's just from what I've been able to see, it's worked well. With that in mind, hopefully I haven't just jinxed myself. What we're gonna focus on is Pig Reproduction 101. How I'm going to do this and how I'm going to think about this, or at least the thought that I've had in mind as I've been preparing the material, is that this is a 101 course. And so as a college professor down at Texas A&M, and I'm kind of intimately familiar with, with college courses, we kind of think about our 101 classes designed to present a lot of information. Maybe it doesn't necessarily provide an incredibly deep dive into certain parts of the information, but to present a broad amount of information and hopefully to get you thinking about things that you may be interested in knowing more about, things that, kind of as we're going, you say, oh, that's a little bit interesting. Maybe I need to ask questions about that. Reproduction questions can be some of the most challenging to type into a chat box, and can be some of the most challenging to get an immediate answer that directly satisfies your situation, your management, your infrastructure, the whole 9 yards. Everything has to go right in order for reproduction to occur. In fact, that's one of the main hallmarks about pig reproduction, is that it's not really random chance. I mean, individually, one sow might have a big litter or a small litter, but across a herd or across a given length of time, if we're seeing that, for the sake of a round number, our sows are putting out 10 piglets, 10 piglets, 10 piglets, and all of a sudden it drops to 9 piglets, that didn't just happen. Something cost that sow 10% of her reproductive capability. Maybe it's a stress thing, maybe it's a health thing that we're not seeing. Regardless, the point being that, as I was trying to put these slides together and think about all the different directions we could go this, I figured it might be challenging to hit every single person's thoughts about pig production, every single person's needs. I've spent a long time on this title slide so that hopefully you've had time to take a picture or screenshot or jot down my email address. If there are things you want to follow up and talk about, that's what it's there for. How I actually want to do this, though, is I want to provide just a little bit of information about just foundational pig reproduction, anatomy and physiology, just to make sure that we're kind of on the basics with it. And then where we're going to go to next is we're going to talk about the essentials of kind of the bookends, the breeding and farrowing. There are a lot of things, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of things that have to go right in order for good reproduction to occur. I have a small number of topics that we could potentially talk about. Or at least I've got some slides prepared. If you say, I really want to maybe see some pictures about what difficult farrowings look like, or I want to talk about how to use hormonal products and use them to manage reproduction, I've got some slides we can share on those. But again, my focus is really going to be on kind of just the background and then the finer points of breeding and farrowing, and we can kind of get into different areas of reproduction if so desired. And so, of course, then I've gone ahead and I've lingered on this slide as well to also give you some time to jot down my email address. So where we're going to start with this is just some basic backgrounds of pig reproductive performance and some kind of maybe like glossary terms and some numbers to have in your mind as we kind of get going in this. If we look at the schematic there on the left-hand side, that's a representation of the reproductive cycle in the pig. If you start at the top at 12 o'clock, that would be our breeding event. If we have pigs that are sexually mature and they are sexually receptive, breeding occurs. Of course, let's pause there right away a moment. When does sexual maturity happen? In the pig, approximately 6 months of age, but you'll find differences. You'll find variation a month or more either way, depending on the animal's genetics and their plane of nutrition, their health, whether or not they're stressed or anything like that. But approximately 6 months of age, that gilt becomes receptive to breeding. Now, an interesting thing about the gilt is the very first time that she stands in heat, we don't recommend breeding her. She hasn't necessarily got it all figured out. That first ovulation can support a pregnancy, but the litter size resulting from that very first sexual period of sexual receptivity will probably be disappointing. We like to watch her do it the first time. We like to watch her come into heat and then breed her on subsequent cycles. The actual period of sexual receptivity is called estrus, ESTRUS. That's how long she's going to be interested in the male. If she is exposed to the male and if she is at the right time point where she's sexually receptive and she's in heat, then she'll stand to be mounted. She'll allow an insemination to happen and a pregnancy will occur. That in the pig persists. That period lasts for about 60 hours. Again, there's a lot of variation. Some pigs that's going to be more like 2 days. Some pigs it's going to be more like 3 days. We tend to see it, some differences between gilts and sows. Again, plane of nutrition. If that breeding occurs during the period of estrus, and if a pregnancy happens, if there's a sufficient number of embryos in the uterus, maternal recognition of pregnancy occurs about 2 weeks after breeding. And if she has the appropriate number of embryos and she checks the boxes biologically, then she proceeds on to pregnancy, or she proceeds on to carry out the remainder of the pregnancy, which would last about 115-ish days. If pregnancy did not occur for some reason, the semen quality was bad, if a significant extent of embryonic mortality occurred early on in pregnancy, then she'll just simply fail to recognize a pregnancy event. She'll come back into heat 21 days after the initial breeding. And so that 21-day cycle, the estrus cycle, is the interval between her sexual receptivity. Provided she's pregnant, gestation length is about 115 days. That's going to be, again, variable and dependent on genetics and plane of nutrition. And I'll tell you that the old textbooks in the intro to animal science classes would tell you it's 114 days. At the Texas A&M Swine unit here in College Station, we raise a reproductively capable animal that puts out large litter sizes. With large litter sizes, they spend more time in the oven. I have never had a gilt. I've had one female farrow on day 114. I have had more pigs farrow past day 120. That's not unusual for our genetics. For other genetics, that might be very unusual. And so you should probably know a little bit about the animals that you're trying to breed and what necessarily they'd be capable of. Piglets are born. They stay on those sows for variable length, however long we desire them to stay on before we separate them. Typically, that's about 21 days. There's a number of reasons for why 21 days makes sense. And if you want to ask questions about that, we can. And then we remove the piglets. About 5 days later, she comes back into heat again. And then in theory, she's bred again, and the whole process starts all over. Just to show some pictures of what a reproductive tract looks like in the pig, just to kind of make sure we're on the same page with some things. So we're looking at 3 different pictures here. If we look at the one on the left, which is a complete repro tract, where I want to start is at the most interior, the ovaries. And so those are labeled pointing at those two small little balls. Those would be our gonads, the corollary to the male testes. That's the site of hormone secretion and major hormonal activity. That's also where the eggs are going to be ovulated out of during estrus. Where those eggs are going to go is into that small little tube called the oviduct, and the oviduct is important because that's the site of fertilization. If we have good semen being supplied into the reproductive tract, those sperm cells, and I'll show you where those those sperm cells are being deposited here in just a second. Those sperm cells have to travel all the way to the oviduct, and that's where they meet the egg and fertilize. And so that's going to become important as we think about our timing of ovulation. The uterus in the pig is quite long, and the reason for that is it's the site of fetal development. If you look at that picture above, what we're looking at is a pig uterus. From one end to the other, that thing spreads out well over the length of a front loader on a skid steer. That was actually a pig that we had at our swine unit that unfortunately died not long before farrowing, which was obviously a tragic loss. I wasn't going to completely throw away the value from that animal, though, and so I dissected the repro tract and we used it for teaching. You can see how large that organ becomes and all those fetuses spaced. You can see the outline of each piglet kind of spaced throughout the uterus. The next thing as we kind of move towards the center and down towards the main portion of the reproductive tract is the cervix. The cervix is going to be the site of semen deposition during both natural mating as well as traditional, conventional, artificial insemination. During a natural mating, the boar's penis would extend through the vagina into the cervix, and the same exact thing would be happening if you were artificially inseminating. And so that's the picture over on the right-hand side, showing an AI catheter in that pig's cervix. And we'll talk about breeding here in just a little bit. But you can see in that picture on the right, the cervix is opened up, and then there's folds, protrusions of that tissue inside the cervix that'll actually grip onto the boar's penis or grip onto the AI catheter and help draw semen down into the remainder of the reproductive tract. And so now we've got a fairly decent understanding of what the reproductive tract looks like. I want to spend just a second on this slide, and then we're going to talk and kind of shift gears and talk more about breeding and about farrowing. What this slide shows is the contents, or at least what the offspring would be looking like from the point of breeding up to farrowing. And it also shows what might happen if something goes wrong during reproduction. If we start with this time point over here on the far left, we see that this goes from conception, so that's breeding and the fertilization of piglets, all the way over to parturition, that's farrowing. So we've got some days associated with it, day 1 of pregnancy, maternal recognition of pregnancy happening about 2 weeks later. And we've got placental development happening about day 30, fetal development happening about day 40, something like that. The reason this is important to know is because if everything goes according to plan, the pig should start pregnancy with a lot more piglets than are ultimately going to come out at farrowing. It is common for her to ovulate far more eggs than are going to be actually born alive as piglets. My genetics here at the Animal Science Swine Unit at Texas A&M, again, I mentioned our genetics are pretty prolific. They put out a large number of pigs. If I get a litter of 15, which our sows can do fairly easily, if I get a litter of 15, she probably started by ovulating closer to 30 eggs. Most of those would have become piglets. They would have become embryos. It's important to know what happens to those over the course of gestation. During the first trimester, most of our embryonic death is going to be occurring. At this point in time, we can see this picture up here from Wayne Singleton at Purdue. This shows an embryo at 25 days into pregnancy. This little clump of cells in the middle is the future piglet. The way that I describe it to our students, for lack of better words, is it's kind of just a Walmart bag full of some fluid. And that's a gross oversimplification of a pig embryo, but that's essentially what this is. If we have embryonic loss happening during the first trimester, which is common, but if we have an excessive amount of it, what will happen is we'll just have a really small, disappointing litter size, because those embryos just get broken down and completely reabsorbed by the sow. She absorbs them internally, all the fluid, all the tissue, and it's like they were never there in the first place. After about day 40, though, the embryo stops looking like this, and it starts to actually look like a piglet, and it grows a skeleton. If we have fetuses being lost during the second and then into the third trimester, the soft tissue will again break down, but she can't break down the skeleton. And so if you ever look at what comes out of the back end of a sow at farrowing, you might see a small, tiny little skeleton in kind of a grayish green bag. And we call that a mummified fetus. It's a piglet that died about halfway through pregnancy. If you were so inclined, you could take an assessment of how long and how developed that fetus was and have a fairly decent idea of when it was lost during gestation. And then if you were so inclined, you could think back and say, all right, well, what happened on the farm? And if this piglet died maybe about day 60 or so of pregnancy, based on its size, you could be thinking about what potentially may have happened at that point in time that would have caused the sow to lose those piglets. Stillborns then are pigs that die during the process of farrowing. It's piglets that essentially make it to the finish line. They just don't come out alive. Mummies are normal. Stillborns are normal. If we expect 2% of the litter to be mummies, that's probably normal. If we expect 5 to 7% of the litter to be stillborns, that's okay. More than that, though, and something is going wrong. We either have stress during the middle of gestation, or we have stress during farrowing, and she's not able to get those piglets out. So I want to shift gears, and I want to talk about kind of the essentials of breeding and then the essentials of farrowing. We're going to start with the essentials of breeding, starting with heat checking. And what I mean by heat checking is putting your males and your females together to detect if the female is at the right stage in the estrus cycle to be sexually receptive. The female is cycling. She might be sexually receptive. She might be in that roughly 60-hour period when she's receptive to the male. We won't know it unless she actually gets in front of the male. And the reason is the boar, produces in his testes a compound that then it's a derivative of testosterone, and then it gets released through pheromones in his saliva that then when she gets contact with him, she smells that, and it goes from the olfactory system straight into the brain. And if she is at the right stage in her cycle that she's sexually receptive, then she shows the behavioral signs of being in heat, which I'm going to show you what those are on the next page. Long story short, in order for effective breeding to happen, we've got to have either an intact male or the right components of an intact male. What I mean by that is there are products out there where you can actually get that pheromone in an aerosolized can, and you can spray it on the females or you can spray it onto a rag and put it on their snouts. Now, I personally do not use them. I just use a boar for heat checking. They are better than nothing, though. I don't think that they're going to be as good as an intact male, but they are better than nothing. What this also means is that snout-to-snout contact is sufficient. As long as your pigs can be on different sides of the fence and just make out for a little bit, then they're going to be okay. Moving the males and females to a neutral location to accomplish this is ideal. That does involve moving the male, and that's a challenge. I don't do that at our swine unit because I don't trust our student workers and I don't trust the boar. Instead, what we do is we move the females to the male's location. I want them overwhelmed by his smell and his presence. The least preferred option is moving the male to the female's location, because if the female, I want her to just pay attention to him. I don't want her to get bored and leave. And so you kind of would have to think about what you can pull off on your farm. What we're looking for is that pig, that female, to stand to be mounted. If we see her, if she has snout-to-snout contact with the male, then we should see her standing to be mounted. Her entire body will flex. She'll become rigid. You could walk up to her and sit on her back. She's expecting a boar that weighs much more than you to sit on her back. So you're not going to do her any harm. There are other indicators of being in heat, such as agitation. In certain breeds, they'll pin their ears up close to their head. You'll see enlargement and swelling of the vulva. The one that we look for, though, would be that standing heat response. And you can walk behind her and put pressure on her back, and you can get a good response from her. Now, this is where breeding becomes a little bit complicated if we're doing things like artificial insemination. My recommendation, so first off, before I provide the recommendation, let me provide a little bit of insights into biology. While the animal is in that period of sexual receptivity, we don't know when exactly ovulation occurs. Ovulation is the release of the eggs. If she's in heat for about 60 hours, ovulation is going to happen at roughly the 40-hour mark. And that's because ovulation happens 2/3 of the way through estrus. It is extraordinarily difficult to know exactly when ovulation happens because we rarely know when exactly she started estrus, and we definitely don't know how long she's planning to be in estrus. We get the best fertility, though, when we get semen into that animal between 0 and 24 hours prior to ovulation. Now, the semen dose, if we're using artificial insemination, is going to have pretty good fertility for at least 24 hours. What that means, though, is that our jobs can actually be fairly easy. We can simplify this. If heat checking and estrus detection is happening every 24 hours, then the game plan becomes kind of simple. Breed her right when you see her in heat, wait 24 hours, and breed her again. And what that'll do is that'll provide about 48 hours of coverage, 48 hours of good semen in the reproductive tract that should ultimately then result in sperm cells meeting eggs at the right time. Now, where people mess that up is they see on the slide every 24 hours, they hear me say every 24 hours, and then what they think to themselves later on is once a day. And those are not the same thing. Right? Every 24 hours means that if you do it at 9 a.m. today, you'll do it again at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and it needs to be repeatable. If instead you do it at 7 a.m. and then 3 p.m. the next day, and then 10 a.m. the following day, now we've got gaps, and now we're going to have less than ideal reproductive performance. Artificial insemination is a fairly common practice in the swine industry. Depending on your farm, though, it may or may not be for you. It may just be more valuable to have a boar do the job. There's a number of advantages of artificial insemination: decreased cost of keeping the animal, decreased challenges of trying to manage the genetics and the inbreeding. In general, your biosecurity can be better if you don't have to bring that pig back and forth onto the farm. There are different strategies or different types of artificial insemination available. One would be a conventional, traditional depositing semen into the cervix. I'll tell you, when I teach students how to do it, I tell them, you're going to watch me do it once. I'm going to watch you do it once. And then once I give you like the check mark, you're pretty much an expert at it. And they don't believe me, and then they do it and they realize it's really not that bad. With conventional artificial insemination, meaning depositing the semen into the cervix, it's fairly easy to know if you're in the right spot because that AI rod is going to continue to progress towards the cervix. You'll continue to push it in, and then she's actually going to grab it. So I have an AI rod because you just got to have one laying around the house. And if you imagine that my fingers are the sow's cervix, what will happen is if you're putting that into her reproductive tract, if you start to screw it to the left, like counterclockwise, like you're turning your car to the left, you're going to screw that directly into her cervix and she'll grip onto it. If she has a boar in front of her and he's providing that pheromonal stimulation and she's locked and rigid and in standing heat, her reproductive tract is going to be clamping down on this, and that's going to draw the semen into her uterus. She would be providing the exact same stimulation on the boar's penis during a natural mating event. Overwhelmingly, I think cervical AI gets the job done. There is a second strategy called post-cervical AI. It requires a few more steps to move an AI rod, a second rod, past the first one into the uterus. I don't think it has a lot of benefit for everybody. If it's something that you want to know more about, though, please just let me know. There's definitely some considerations and some added challenges with it, and it requires a level of expertise that, like I said, I don't think makes it necessary for everybody. But for sure, we can talk about it later if that's something that you have in mind. Where I want to flip gears and spend the remainder of our time on would be the sow at farrowing. The sow has an incredibly important job to do, right? The sow has a difficult job to do. It's our objective to make sure that she can do it. So I want to try to keep her as comfortable and as clean as possible. I want to put her into an area a few days prior to her due date, give her time to acclimate to that new environment if we're going to try and manage her farrowing space. Give her time to acclimate to it. If it's also happening where it's a change in diet, I want to give her time to acclimate to that as well. If she's in a good body condition, and Dr. Niblett talked about nutrition earlier, if she's in a good body condition and she's been bred to the right animals, she should be able to get those piglets out and take care of them herself. Occasionally that doesn't happen and we need to intervene. If we're having situations in which we have to intervene on every single litter, then something else is wrong about our management or our genetics. If we are going to be supervising farrowing, we can be looking for things to indicate when piglets are going to come. A few days out from delivery, we would notice some restlessness. It may be possible to see a little bit of milk down. We'll see nest building behavior. If she's in a confined farrowing crate, that means she's going to go a little bit nuts. She's going to stand up and smash the feeder around and try to maybe paw at the ground. If she's outdoors, or if she's in more of a pasture situation, she'll probably separate from the herd and she'll go actually build a nest. A few hours out from delivery, we're going to start to have milk let down. You could walk up to her, you could hand milk her teats, and she'll express some milk. And then as those contractions increase in strength, and it kind of looks like she's doing a sit-up on her side, you can see those becoming more intense. And then once you begin to see discharge, you know that you're going to be having some piglets here in just a few minutes. Normal pig delivery is about 15 to 20 minutes, but that can vary pretty widely. I will tell you that early on in farrowing, I'm okay letting the sow go a little bit longer in between piglets without getting worried. I'll also tell you that I have colleagues that disagree with me on that. So early on in farrowing, that sow is still getting her contractile rhythms. Once the first piglets get out, they come around, they start nursing on the sow's udder. The hormones that are responsible for milk letdown are the same ones responsible for uterine contractions. So as she gets more piglets out, she's going to find a rhythm. She's going to get the rest of them out. I'm okay letting her go a little bit longer early on in farrowing when it's the first few pigs on the ground. You got to pay attention to her, though. If she's, is she actively straining and struggling? And if so, then maybe one's stuck and we need to go in and intervene. If she's only got two pigs walking around and then she's just kind of hanging out there and she's not pushing too hard, I'm inclined to let her do her own thing for a little bit. If though she's pushing every 15 minutes and all of a sudden it becomes an hour, we've got a problem. One of the foundations of litter-bearing reproduction is, unfortunately, that pre-weaning mortality occurs. I tell my students that they're not allowed to say on an exam that crushing is the number one cause of death, because I tell them that implies that it's just bad luck and we can't do anything about it. Some sows are not great sows. Some sows are a little bit better. In general, though, I'm a big fan of this quote that comes out of a scientific publication from a few years ago. Maternal overlay is unique, right? What we really need to be asking ourselves is, why were the piglets huddled up so close to the sow in the first place? Why, if they were cold, if they were hungry, then they're huddling up and then they're in harm's way. Those first 3 days of age are critical for these things. If we can keep the pig warm, and if we can keep, if the sow is doing a good job of milking and she's comfortable and she's healthy and she's taking care of the pigs, hopefully we can keep mortality down to a minimum. If your farm is averaging 15-ish% pre-weaning mortality, that's pretty average. If you're at 10% pre-weaning mortality, that's incredibly good. If you're less than 10% mortality, you're probably lying, right? Unfortunately, piglet mortality is a thing that happens. How we manage piglet mortality is we get them plugged into the sow. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the graphs because we're running out of time, but in general, the colostrum is the first fluid that's produced by the sow for the first 24 hours post-farrowing. The piglets have got to consume it. They've got to have an opportunity to get onto the sow and actually consume that. There's a strategy called split suckling, in which you could, if your farrowing space allows, remove piglets for a period of time. and then allow the others to suckle uninterrupted and then flip-flop them. And if you did that during the first 12 hours or so post-farrowing, when colostrum is at its greatest nutritional benefit, then you may find an improvement in colostrum intake and piglet survivability. The very last thing is just discussing lactation. What we need is the sow to eat a lot of feed during lactation and to have piglets on her. As long as she has piglets on her, she's not going to come back into heat. Once that suckling stimulus is removed, she'll return to heat about 5 days later, unless she's lost a lot of body condition. And if she's lost a lot of body condition, then she's not going to come back into heat, or she's going to have a really poor ovulation and a much smaller litter size the second time around. And Marissa, I think I've used up pretty much all of the time allotted to me. But if there are any questions, we can for sure talk about those and kind of address anything that's on people's minds.
Yeah, if you guys want to start putting questions in the chat, I can start you off in case anyone else has any, and then we can get back to the stage. But what are your thoughts on keeping a sow that may have like really great looking piglets, but maybe not the most maternal in nature and not doing her job there? Would you keep her, or are you selling her?
Okay, so that's a great question. I'll preface it by saying not everyone agrees with me on this. I don't keep sows that don't do their jobs. I tell that to people, and then they're going to say, well, yeah, but that pig, it's the best, and we've got to have that pig. And that's not the way that I run my farm. I want sows that the sow has a job to do. It's to make babies and to take care of them. And if she doesn't take care of those babies, if she's not attentive to them, if she's a poor milker, if she savages them, now savaging is attacking her piglets. And that's sometimes, actually often, it's a function of something else. That's a function of her being unnecessarily stressed around farrowing. It may be somebody else's fault that she's savaging and not hers. But no, in general, if that's a sow that isn't doing a great job with her babies, my personal preference is I don't keep her around. But plenty of people would disagree with me on that.
All right, Tamaya said, first time farrowing about 30 days. We have 3 show gilts bred. Do you have any advice?
Email me and we'll have a longer conversation about things that we can actually do. When I dipped out of Dr. Bowman's presentation, he had just started talking about reproductive things. I don't know if he got to vaccinations, pre-farrow vaccinations for keeping the baby pigs healthy. I think those are super, super important. And if you're about 30 days out from farrowing, you're at the right time to be vaccinating pre-farrowing for things like E. coli and Clostridium and things that would help keep the baby pigs alive. They would improve the immunological quality of the colostrum. So that would be one area to potentially think through. I would also just really evaluate the environment that they're going to be in, right? Evaluating the environment in terms of, is it clean and is it comfortable? Can it stay warm? Can I get into it if I have to provide some assistance? Now is the time to think about that, not later on. With 30 days remaining, you might also have a little bit of time, not a whale of a lot of time, but you might have some time to fine tune her body condition. If she's super, super thin, or if she's a little on the thin side, she's probably going to tire out during farrowing. If she's over-conditioned, kind of depends on the degree of over-condition. Sometimes over-conditioned sows also tire out. And so over-conditioned sows can have some issues with stillborns. And so there's a number of things that we can kind of dig into in a greater amount of detail. And if you want to send an email and set up that conversation, we can talk about that.